Wonderful. And thank you for getting us started talking about, links between cilantro and tabs, because today is, with the focus on data storytelling, is an invitation to think about information circulating in the world with fresh eyes, with this idea of data storytelling. So we're very excited to be here at NJAL this year. Thank you to Eric. Thank you to all the organizers who have put this online event together. We're a team of adult educators. There's 7 of us on the line today, joining you today from California. And we're a team of adult educators and public health practitioners. And we've been working on a project for a couple years now. It now has a name. It's called the Communicative Justice Learner Leadership Project. Maybe one of our team members can drop that in the chat. And it's a project that brings together language learning, data science, and health equity. And we hope that our title, Data Storytelling with Adult English Language Learners, conveys our passions, that we love talking about data in the same way we just did. We love talking about data related to cilantro and tabs because it's a window into how we operate in the world. We're also passionate about language learning. And we're also passionate about the stories we can tell about both. I thank you to everybody who's dropping who you are in the chat. It gives us a sense of spread across your state. That I'm going to quickly introduce who you are. And when I call your name, if you could unmute and you're going to just give I'd appreciate that. So my name is Marisol. I've known Eric for a very, very long time, as we were saying at the beginning. And I train English language teachers out here in San Francisco at San Francisco State University. And one of the things I love about our topic, and I really actually miss, is working with learners to look at data that they themselves created, that they themselves gathered. And I love that kind of work. I'm going to turn it over to Margaret, if you could wave.
Marisol, I think there's some static coming through your microphone. Maybe it's bumping up against something, or...
I'm just taking off my headset. How about that?
That sounds much better.
Okay, good. Margaret?
Sorry, I didn't hear you because of the static. Hi, everybody. I'm Margaret Hanley. I'm an epidemiologist and public health practitioner. I've worked with Marisol for a long time, but I'm based at UC San Francisco at the Prize Center, which you see on the screen here. And I'm very passionate about health communication and improving the visibility of language and the ideas that people who are language learners have about health. Thanks.
Thanks. María José.
Hola, soy María José. I'm María José Bastías, an ESL instructor at Mujeres Unidas y Activas, a grassroots organization for immigrant Latinas in San Francisco. And I'm also an EDD in Educational Leadership student candidate at San Francisco State. Thanks.
Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca. I am in the MA Literatures program at San Francisco State University, and I'm one of the graduate research assistants on this project. For me, it's been a really great experience to get more experience with teaching in various forms.
We're going to move to Jasmine.
Hello, I'm Jasmine. I'm in the Master's in TESOL program at San Francisco State, and I'm also a graduate research assistant on this project. I'm a longtime language educator, and I'm so excited to be learning and working in new contexts that are important to learners and myself. Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to go back over to UCSF to Jose Parra.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jose Parra. I'm an analyst at University of California, San Francisco. And yeah, I'm new to the team and have really been enjoying learning innovative ways to look at data and get some really valuable insights on community with the data that we're looking at. So very happy to be here.
Great, thanks. And Darren.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darren. I'm an incoming senior at UC Berkeley, and I'm majoring in molecular and cell biology on the pre-medical path. And I'm really interested in health literacy, community engagement, and working with underserved communities as well.
Wonderful. One of the things I wish for every adult educator on the line today is, did I just say on the line? That's so old. On Zoom, that everyone could have the kind of partnership team that I have. If you could imagine walking around the world where I have at the ready access to a public health epidemiologist, a data analyst, and some really enthusiastic grad students. It's a great team, and it really is a model for the kind of work that we're trying to get done in adult education. Next slide, Rebecca. I'm going to show you a couple images from an adult ESL class. This is actually from Maria Jose's class a couple of years ago. And our classes are where students are invited to think about the information, the data, the images, the media campaigns, all the sound bites circulating around us, particularly during this pandemic. And when you think about the word data scientist or data science or health data, invariably, I don't think that these images are the first things that come to people's mind. And that's rather unfortunate. There is a scholar out there. Her name is Catherine D'Ignacio. She's written a book called Data Feminism. You can read the entire book online for free. She says that too often, too much of what we think of data science is only designed for and by data scientists. And that means that people in our communities that we serve through our adult ed programs are more likely to be the subjects of data rather than to use the data for their own purposes. The work we're doing on our project in the next 45 minutes is just going to be a quick through by on this, is called Communicative Justice Learner Leadership. And our hope is that this collaboration between adult ed, data science, and public health is going to change the way we think about health data by changing the way we engage our adult learners in our classrooms, whether as creators of data, storytellers of data, and data visualizers. Now, the word data is often very intimidating to people. It's like math. It gets confused with it gets hung up in that way. So we're going to do a quick warm up. Eric's kind of done this for me a little bit, which is kind of cool with the cilantro question. But if you go to the next slide, we want to remind you that data storytelling is a capacity that we all have. So we're going to talk about vaccinations and, get ready, horoscopes. Now, some people on the Zoom probably think horoscopes are awesome entertainment. Some of you may think it's actually a very legitimate insight into reality. Doesn't really matter. We're not going to debate that right now. We're going to ask everybody the same question is, do you think that there's a link between your zodiac sign and whether or not you're vaccinated? Now, I'm not going to ask personally, everybody. If you want to share in the chat, please feel free. But let's just play this out. I'm a Gemini. We're rather optimistic as a group, but we're also extremely indecisive. So that might predict that, Geminis tend to be wishy-washy, and maybe it took me a long time to figure out, should I do it? Should I not do it? And then Rebecca, who's told me the other day that she's a Taurus. Did you know that Tauruses are known to be homebodies and they're not easily persuaded? Scorpios, Darren is a Scorpio. They're actually extremely distrustful, apparently. So what might that predict about Scorpios and their vaccination rates? So my question is, if you had to say among the zodiac signs, who would be the most likely to get vaccinated versus the least likely, what would a prediction be? And so I had I'm just noting in the chat, like a lot of people said, that question, no way. The zodiac has nothing to do with vaccination rates. Okay, I see the thing about something hitting the microphone. Are you guys still hearing it from me, from my side? Because I'm off all mic.
I think it's when you're moving your papers and shuffling your papers.
But I'm not touching a mic. Let's see.
It's not constant, but.
I think it's the government.
Yes, it's echelon.
Okay, I'll try to be very still. How about that? Is like for a Gemini, that's really hard, right? So Any other thoughts? Does anybody want to unmute and just say, you know, what might a prediction be for themselves or maybe people in their zodiac sign? Do we have any hand raises, or feel free to unmute and jump right in there?
Hi, I'm Delia,
Hi, Delia.
and I'm a Leo. So I think maybe a Leo would be more likely to be vaccinated because they're social beings, and not being vaccinated would cause too many restrictions and interfere with their desire to be social and out.
No, I love that. That sounds pretty good. Like this kind of social altruism that Leos have, that they would rush out there and get the vaccine. Does anybody have want to spin on a different zodiac sign?
Well, as a Capricorn who's rational and logical, yes, go get the vaccine because it's the best way to get through this pandemic.
Okay, let me put you out of your misery. The state of Utah, next slide, actually went out and collected this data. So Dahlia, you're right. Congratulations. Look at that. Leos, according to this data set they had the greatest proportion of people who were vaccinated. Look at people like Darren, those poor Scorpios who were extremely distrustful of the vaccine system and are down there at 46%. Anything surprising here? Or affirming? Dahlia, oh, go ahead, Lauren.
I'm disappointed in my fellow Scorpios. I thought we would have a better vaccination rate because I was thinking we don't trust other people necessarily, to be honest, like if they're having symptoms or taking precautions. But I was thinking we would trust medical experts and doctors and things like that.
Wonderful. Thank you. This was such a great interpretation. So, yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Merdita, and I am also a Scorpio. And my sister, who was born 2 years later on my birthday, is completely anti-vax, and I'm completely pro-vax. So go explain that.
Exactly. And I love the way you just started to tell a story. You started to tell us about your sisters, and you started telling us about when you were born and when your birthdays are. It's such a wonderful way to present your interpretation. So thanks for those answers. So the state of Utah did this partly to break up the message fatigue. They collected this data in the summer. Is that correct, Margaret? Summer of 2020, when people were, or maybe, no, it might have been 21 when the vaccines were out, to try and get people more excited about the vaccination discussion. And so they knew it would be a little entertaining, but that some people would take it seriously enough. But I want you to notice the way we're talking about this data. We're playing the believing, doubting game. And we're practicing thinking about data in lots of different ways. Some of the things we're saying seem true, some things seem completely false, some things we're not so sure about. You heard someone else say earlier, well, I'm a Scorpio, I acted this way, but other people in my group don't seem to have thought the same way as me. How can that be? And we're really practicing interpreting something like vaccination rates in a new way. So how this introduction of the horoscope gives you a new way to tell a familiar story. We're going to look at another example. I know I can see lots of questions about the Utah data. We'll give you that information, and we're going to be able to come back to some of these discussions later. But let's just do a second example. This phrase, I imagine you've heard. Nod your head, give a thumbs up. You probably heard this. Apparently, if you look at the news databases and you can click on this QR code, it takes you to a database of news stories. This phrase has been used over 8,000 times during the coronavirus pandemic. And before the pandemic, it was rarely used in any health context. It was used in business. So I want you to think about, just for a few seconds here, when did you first hear this phrase? Do you recall the visual that might have been presented to you, or the story, or the message that was sent to you when you heard this? I'm also curious about if your students came to you and said, teacher, can you explain to me what flatten the curve means? Any thoughts on that?
So this is not rhetorical. She's actually asking you to put stuff in the
Yeah,
chat.
yeah,
So
you
it's
notice
complete.
Alicia's like, particularly it was at the height of peaking that we were starting to hear about flatten the curve. And not hearing it on some news outlets, but maybe on others. Oh, and Karen, your students asked, and we looked at a news story together to try and get that. Sarah, you're mentioning graphs. Do you remember what the graphs look like? Okay, and so Katie's like, you can even imagine sort of this plateau. Well, you live in the state of New Jersey, so let's go to the next slide. Maybe you saw this one, which comes from your State Department. And this was used, you can find it freely on the internet. And you can see where's the flattening, where does the flattening occur? What do we mean by the flattening of the curve, right? And a lot of it is oriented to that dotted line in the middle is what can hospitals handle? Does anybody want to maybe share a memory of when they started seeing this kind of graphic? What it made you think, what it made you feel? Did it make you do anything? Talk to anybody? Ask questions of anyone?
I remember seeing this on the news, flattening the curve, and I understood what it meant. I didn't have to think about it. I knew they were talking about the numbers going up and, you know, trying to bring the numbers coming back down.
And thank you for that. And assuming we also want our learners to stay safe during this time of pandemic, did you wonder, or do you wonder now, what are the barriers to our learners being able to engage with this kind of message, which was a very popular way of getting the message out?
Are you asking me, or are you asking?
Sure, anybody, like what would be challenging? What would you have to support your learners to understand by looking at graphs like these?
Well, you would have to explain, you know, the graph. I mean, maybe not so much the graph, depends on the students, how much they're exposed to graphs. But, you know, if they've never been exposed to graphs, you would have to explain the graph. And then you would explain what flattening the curve means.
Exactly. And so if you go to the next slide, Rebecca, flattening is a dynamic word, right? It's a verb that you have to think about before and after. So we found this one that we really like. Does this one help? I'm not sure who was just speaking, but if you brought this to your students, would this be a more dynamic way of sharing information?
Yeah, absolutely, because you actually see the flattening happen.
Yeah, what other things? Yeah, what other things do you think your students would notice looking at this, or what questions might they ask you if they looked at this graph? Yeah, Kate. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Maybe what's being said on the bottom between the two characters.
Yeah, I love how I particularly like the one how this captures a conversation, right? Like thinking in this way and thinking in another way. Yesterday we had a meeting and we thought we might ask our students, do you know people like the orange person, or do you know people who think like the green person? And how is that affecting the way they're thinking about flattening the curve? Wonderful. So again, notice another way. I mean, this data is a little bit more serious than the COVID one or than the horoscope one, but the idea that there's a story we're trying to read into the data. And the question is, how do we invite our learners to share in that storytelling as well? We're going to go to the next slide. And I'm going to pass it over to one of our team members. This by way of summary of the kinds of things we're trying to do in our own pedagogy to preserve the talk and interaction that you were just hearing about as we looked at these two warm-up activities. I'm going to go to Jasmine.
Thank you. So the question is, what supports data literacy learning? And based on these 2 warm-up activities that we just engaged in, we hope you can see that if you want to nurture learners' confidence as data storytellers, there's a lot of talk and interaction about data is essential. So we wanted to share with you some of our process, what we've been working on, and in terms of how we think we can best support data literacy learning with our students. So here we highlight the qualities that we feel are such a part of our data literacy pedagogy. And we hope you can see how each of these qualities were part of the 2 warm-up activities that we just did. So we believe that, as you can see here, it's all about opportunities, giving our students opportunities. So learners need opportunities to play with the data, and this can mean a lot of different things. This means hearing it, seeing it, reading, writing, saying it, embodying it, imagining it, and problem solving with others. And we think classrooms are an ideal social context for this kind of data work. Learners also need opportunities to see themselves in the data. As we said, that's often not what happens. Often people are the subject of the data, but they're not actually seeing themselves in it. And we wanted to model that personalization with the horoscope data and to make seeing yourself in the data a fun discovery process, something fun to engage in. And finally, learners need to have opportunities to practice actually speaking data and being comfortable with that. So now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Rebecca, who will tell you a bit about our learning domains. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. So I'm going to be talking a bit about our learning domains for the Communicative Justice Learner Leadership Project. We've been working as a team over the past several months to translate some of the pedagogical beliefs about talk and interaction around data that we've been talking about so far during this presentation into a shareable curricular framework. And so on the screen are 5 domains of learning that would help encourage learners to develop their capacity as data storytellers. Understanding data, learning to speak data, playing with data, data storytelling with a purpose, and then finally, curiosity and courage. These are not sequential in that you have to start at any one point. You could really enter this CJLL framework at any point in the domains. But these 5 domains comprise 40 learning objectives or SWOBATs. And we don't have time today to go into detail about the SWOBATs, but we do want to point out the importance we've placed on the socio-emotional dimensions of becoming a data storyteller. And so being a data storyteller requires a special kind of curiosity and courage, because we will think about data in ways that are new and unfamiliar. And when we work with data like that, we ask questions about data that don't necessarily have easy answers. And so curiosity is a commitment to keep asking good questions because it matters to the learners themselves and their communities. Now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Maria Jose, who will give us some examples of what these SWOBATs look like in practice.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, my colleague Marisol gave us an idea of data being used to engage learners and inviting them to tell their stories. Rebecca and Jasmine shared with us the model that we developed. And now I'm going to give you some examples of how this can be implemented in the classrooms. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I am an ESL instructor and I work with Spanish and MAM speakers. In 2019, I was teaching class about stress. And at the beginning of the semester, the course, I asked the students, who helps you? ¿Quién te ayuda? Once we had their answers represented in this word cloud, we looked at the answers, right? And I asked, who helps you? And here we have música, music, Dios, God, hijo, son, esposo, husband, yo solo, myself, mi amiga, my friend. As you can see, this is a bilingual word cloud. So I used it to teach vocabulary about family, community, relatives, but we also talked about religion and loneliness. Next slide, please. At the end of June 2020, many of my students were considering or going back to work. So I taught a short module about this, going back to work during COVID. We used our own data to discover the issues that we had in common and learned language to address them and to talk about them. In this case, we talked about authority and trust. We looked at this bar graph and that had our own data from our class. And I asked questions such as how many people believe doctors and the CDC can tell them when to stop wearing masks? How many people believe their employers should tell them when to stop wearing a mask? If someone believes their employers can tell them when to stop wearing a mask, what can we do? What can we tell them? Should we tell them something? The purpose of this activity was not to show them who was right or wrong, but for them to see and to use data to inform their opinions and interactions with relatives and the community and also their employers. Some of the themes that emerged from this conversation were safety in the workplace, regulations during COVID, and workers' rights. Let's go to the next one. All right. This activity is one of my favorite for multiple reasons. In 2019, I was teaching a short class, a short module about mental health, and my students were really interested in knowing more about the autism spectrum, schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder, and ADHD. So here I'm sharing with you what we did with ADHD. And you can see that the pie charts are not technically precise, and yet learners had the opportunity to find common symptoms, reflect on categories, create their own pie charts using paper plates, interpret each other's pie charts, and think about the implications of ADHD in their lives. Once again, the pie charts made with paper plates gave us opportunities to learn and practice language, to talk about ADHD, feel less threatened by pie charts, play with data, interpret different perspectives about the same topic, and also this activity opened the floor for learners to tell and share stories, their own stories. So now I would like to open the floor if you have one or two questions for me about what I shared with you.
It's nice to see old-fashioned paper plates. Talking about technology, and in the session with Nell, we were talking about choose the tool that's most appropriate for the task, right? And so then here, paper plates and chart paper gets the job done, right? Probably most efficiently. You don't have to make it complicated technologically.
No, that's such an incredibly important point, Eric, because one of the values we have in our project is that the goal of the learning is not to create a pristine product that looks like it came out of a data science company. Our goal is to support engagement with the data. And if that requires markers, poster, and pie plates, then that's what our learners need. And we'd love to get that message out to data scientists, because they also need to remember that creating a great tool is only as good as the people who are able to use it. And being in Maria Jose's class is such a wonderful reminder of what that can look like. Maria Jose, there is one question maybe that you can answer from Alicia Roman in the chat. I'm reading it, sorry. What topic do you see from, sorry, it's just moving kind of fast. Well, I work with women, only women. So I think it's the conversation gets really interesting, and I'm very open about the topics that we work with. And I usually present them with choices, and then we decide what to. And it's everything. It's about culture, language access, health, self-confidence, language learning. It's about everything, all those topics. Alicia. There's also a question about the learning resources you use for ADD and ADHD because of the English level.
Yeah. So this was actually something very interesting that I used to talk to discuss and get my students thinking about evaluating sources of information. So I took a random image from Google and I showed it to them, and I said, we talked about it, and then I asked them, where does this information come from? And one of them said, la máquina, the machine. So that's when I noticed that presenting my students, showing them data was not enough, that I needed to develop and, you know, teach them skills and competences for them to evaluate what they were reading, because just because it looks, it is a pie chart, it doesn't mean that's completely accurate and actually veridic or true. Yes, Katie, I do. I use translanguaging mostly because I also have mom speakers. Mom is also known as Mayan. So for them, Spanish is their second language, and I use multilingual materials and instruction.
Yeah, so well, I'm sure more questions will come up, and you see Margaret, our colleague, our public health epidemiologist, is asking students, where does the data come from? Like what goes into the creation process is something that we're able to see up close, and know that giving them this experience is analogous to what other data scientists do, but their tools may just look different. So we can go to the next slide. I want to show you one more example. This is what we did with some students in Oakland, where we generated maps from a public health database. And so let's just back up a little bit. The horoscope example, the flatness curve, those are sources of data that come into our social media feed or come into our Facebook feeds, and it comes at us. Maria just walked you through some examples of where learners help create the data that's studied. Now, this now is an example with maps, is data that if you have great partners like we're lucky to have, and we wish for everybody, if you can work within teams to get access to public health tools, there are really important conversations that you can have with your students about the way health and place come together to create equity and inequity. And so this, as you can see, we took some public health data, we simplified the way that they would interact with it so that we could have a focused conversation about where in Oakland do people drink sugary drinks, and where is it high, where is it medium, where is it low. We had them find their neighborhoods of their schools, where they live, where their friends live. We had them do some of that map reading work of what does a color mean on a map, and what do the different colors represent, and what are they trying to convey. And in this example, this conversation, or sorry, this activity led to conversations about, well, the places where they sell more sugary drinks are the places where there are fewer big grocery stores, or things where I have to travel outside my neighborhood to go to a grocery store, so I don't have as much opportunity to find the things that I would prefer to buy. So we show you this map because now we're going to ask you to play with some map data. And this is going to be novel thinking. This may be the first time you see kind of maps like this, and that's part of our goal, is to kind of have some data playtime with you. We're going to look at 3 New Jersey maps, and hope this sparks some thinking and curiosity. The maps you're about to see, no, we're not going to use Jamboard. We're going to actually look right at a map software. And I think, Rebecca, you will take this down from the screen and then move to the Tableau. I want to thank my colleague, Jose, who generated what you're about to see. Okay, there we go. So can we go back one? Yeah, go to this one. So if you know how to use your annotate tool, or you could just use your finger just to know, you can kind of point at the screen. Where are you right now on this map? we often do that with our students. Oh, somebody knows how to use, Ryan's trying to get out his tool and kind of pinpoint where you are on this map if you are represented by the New Jersey map. Oh, Ryan is trying to text us from afar. Yeah, so we actually took the zip code of Brookdale to kind of generate, oh yes, we're getting asked for, can you enlarge the map, Rebecca? Oh, yeah, so you were, that's good. That was good, whatever you just did. So again, the first time we would share this with our students is something like exactly what I asked. Where are you? Can you find your house? Can you find your school? Where do you work? I'm bringing out some local identity with Ryan's We the North beyond there, but not on this map. And just getting them to orient to this special representation of what they see on an everyday basis. So keep this in mind, because now we're going to show you the same map with new information. And Rebecca, could you enlarge this one? And my question for you is, first you have to orient to the top right of the screen where you see this thing called estimated hesitant. Jose, are you here? Can you just read aloud what you have here and maybe just offer a rephrasing of that for the group?
Sure. Yeah. So that that like colorful bar on the top right corner, that's to give you a sense of sort of the scale of how hesitant people might be. The information here was from a New Jersey public health source, where they asked a bunch of people in these different areas how concerned they were about getting the vaccine. And so the map is showing the darker blues are areas where more people tended to be more hesitant to be vaccinated, whereas the lighter blues were comparatively less hesitant, and so more likely to get vaccinated.
Thank you for that. So similar to what we did with the horoscope data, the questions might be, where are you? Do you live in a place where there was high hesitancy or low hesitancy? And then the question always, why? We're actually gonna, in a little bit, let you play with this data, because staring at this is not the same thing as taking your finger and the cursor and having your hand interact with it. So maybe somebody can drop that link in the chat, and you can also, if it doesn't add too many tabs to your screen, you could also bring this up for yourself and find your zip code. So while people are maybe bringing that up, and we'll just give people a minute maybe to find themselves on this map, any thoughts on your first reactions about what does this map show? What questions do you have as a teacher, and what questions would you like to ask your students in looking at this map?
I have a question, I guess, about this topic in general. When we're kind of sharing health information or reading something about COVID, students may be expressing opinions that are not necessarily, the information is not what is the sort of expert recommendations, or they may be saying something about the vaccine. And it's kind of my part as a teacher. Sometimes I want to let them express themselves, but then there's a part of me that's like, oh, that's not true, So I'm kind of thinking about, especially with health issues, what is the best way to deal with that in a class? Because it does kind of bother me. One person may be expressing an opinion that's going to influence other students, and you would want the other people to have the correct information.
Thank you so much for expressing that dilemma. It's a paradox, right? Because on the one hand, as we did with the horoscope, part of the learning requires that you name your assumptions, that you test those assumptions, but that you even can put the things that sound false out there. Because if you don't talk about them, you're suppressing what makes the playing with the data play, trying to test what our assumptions might be, what feels inconclusive, what feels more true or less true. And our belief is, as much as you can invite that sharing, to name those beliefs, and then to invite them to test it against a larger data set, ask more people, find out more information, rather than say, no, that opinion is false. I'm going to invite either Margaret, our public health person, or Maria Jose, how you've dealt with this also in your own class, because this very issue has come up many times when we talk about diabetes or lead poisoning or menopause. What's the right answer is often closes off conversation rather than inviting the data play. Anybody from the team want to hop in here?
Margaret, I can.
Yeah, I think you should go ahead, and I'll speak after.
Okay. I completely agree with the concern that the colleague has raised, and for me, it was challenging at the beginning to feel confident enough to talk about these things in class, but I also saw myself in this leadership role, right? I wasn't teaching anyone, nothing specific, but what I wanted to teach my students was the fact that they had to question the information that they received, no matter where it came from. So for that, I taught them, what's the point? What we sometimes teach in more advanced levels. What's the point? What's the PPA, point, purpose, audience, and just gave them tools to evaluate what they saw. But it was challenging at the beginning, and I've explained, I've explored multiple ways to do this, from, I don't know, how can you deal with scams with phone calls, or we can talk about this later if you want. But I think somebody mentioned this earlier. There's nothing wrong in just teaching our students how to critically think and analyze information. And that's how I see it. Thanks.
Yeah, I just make a couple of comments. I totally agree with that. Both Marisol and Maria's way of framing it about bringing inquiry in, because that will help the discussion. And I think it allows to see that you can model the expression of inquiry in a way that is safe in the classroom. And it doesn't have to be, you're wrong, I don't agree with your opinion. It could be like, do we want to get more information on this? Is it okay to just have different opinions? Or do we want to take a different approach and learn about more information? So that allows people to think about what information could be brought to this question so that we can answer this amongst ourselves. And then also that you can end up having different interpretations, and that can be okay. And that's certainly true in the world I'm in public health. People might look at something very differently, and with the same data set and the same training. And so I think that's an okay thing to explore as well. So yeah, I think it raises an engagement process that is, I think, helpful.
Wonderful. There's so much more that could be said about this topic, and maybe if you want to hang out later a little bit, we can pick that up. But I wanted to ask an important question here about the map we're looking at, which is why, because that's where the data play comes in. If students will say, okay, my zip code is light green, my zip code is dark green, comparing two zip codes, does one zip code is a lighter green than the other green? And then the question is why? And giving students a language to ask lots of different kinds of questions that explore why. For those of you who live in New Jersey, why is there extreme hesitancy, or the darkest hesitancy, which is indicated by the dark blue right in the middle, and it is Long Branch? What are some possibilities about why that might be the case? And, you know, we would model this with the students. Is it because of political reasons, as Dana is suggesting? Is it political?
It could be access.
Very nice. Is it different access to services? And that might lead to questions like, how many COVID or how many vaccination sites are there in Long Branch compared to one where there's lighter green? Is it age? Susanna's
Good.
bringing that up. Go ahead.
Hi, John Cohen here.
Hi, John.
Hey, how you doing? I have a lot of family out there, but anyway, I digress. That area, and I don't live in that area per se, but I have friends up there. It's definitely political. It's more conservative area, and especially in Ocean County in general. But also, you know, knowing the topography and all that, there are some, you know, religious involvement in there too as well. You know, Orthodox Jewish people and others too that congregate that don't have the information maybe that you or I would have. That's all. It's information more than anything. And I'm not assuming anything. It's just that general area. Okay.
Yeah, so, you know, I want to, and again, we're not here, but perhaps we are provoking something. Sure, let's be clear that we hope that this gets our students to ask questions about what they know. I wanted to just echo back what John said. I don't live there, but I know people who are there. Isn't that a way that we build our sense of what information, what data, what truth in the stories we tell, because we're relying on our perspective? And then how can you add to that by looking at this data? So great conversation. I can't wait to study what's more in the chat, since I do not know New Jersey politics other than what I see on news outlets. We're going to show you one more map, which hasn't come up yet. But what if we told you?
I apologize. Somebody wrote that's not Ocean County, it's Monmouth, and it is Monmouth County, and I apologize for that.
Great.
Thanks.
And what a great, we actually added this to our list of language lessons last night. What if your first interpretation is wrong? Oh, I didn't see that the first time. My mistake. Now I see. So John, thanks for modeling something that I think is part of the pragmatics of data play that we often neglect to teach in order to keep the conversation going. So Rebecca, I think we're going to have to enlarge this a little bit more, and we don't have that much more time to look at this. We're happy to send you this link, and you're welcome to play with this database. So on the left-hand side, remember, is the map you just saw, the hesitancy rates. And on the right-hand side, what do you see? Maybe Rebecca, a little bit bigger. Sorry, I'm making you be the NASA space station for us.
Looks like it's job type, but it's.
Exactly. Can you say a little bit more, Eric?
It looks like it's trying to break it down by what position. It looks like there's service industry, sales, you know, management. So SES factors that would maybe account for approaches to vaccines.
Right. So again, we see the color. So right now we're looking at people who work in construction. Exactly, Laura. The darker blue, actually it changes depending on what we click on. So right now you're looking at the map for where in New Jersey do you find a lot of people who work in construction and maintenance. If we click on service, let's go to service. Now you see different colors because it shows the distribution of where do people work who work in the service industry. So this enables you to explore the question, in addition to politics, in addition to age, in addition to access, is the job distribution, is what people's livelihood in these different areas is that contributing? Again, no causation here. These are traveling factors, but someone might do a study in that way. Does that have to do? Does that explain the story? Is that where you work and where you live part of the story for thinking about vaccine hesitancy?
I think the other factor here, New Jersey is one of the most segregated states in the country. And so certainly I think looking at racial demographics and ethnic demographics within the state and within particular counties, right? So within a given county, it's going to be segregated, even county by county, but within counties, there's going to be segregation, which is going to, sort of lay over some of these job types as well, right? So if we think about racial demographics.
Yeah, and our vocabulary is quite sophisticated right now, but I think that learners are also able to generate a list of what other things do you want to know that would help you understand what's going on here. And so you're listing some of these, what languages people speak, what what races, what ethnicities are represented in these different areas. So Jose, if I'm not mistaken, we are going to take some of the input from your chat and we can improve this graphic for this map for you. We apologize for excluding some of the important zip codes. I went with Brookdale based on who was in the program. So we're happy to share a revised link and then invite you to play with this with your students. And in about a month, we'll have a handout similar to the one I just showed you that you can play around with with your students in the fall to look at these different iterations of New Jersey.
Marisol, can I say
sure?
one thing? I think to circle back, I think somebody had made the maybe Lorraine or somebody had made the comment in the chat, right, where we often think about data in binaries, right? We think about like politics and binaries, but those binaries don't map up on every issue, right? So people are like, oh, Long Branch is progressive, but the rest of the county is conservative, right? Or social class or language. And you have those binaries, that can be helpful to think about, but it doesn't mean all the positions are going to align along all of those things, right? And so when you're telling the data story, making sure that you're not falling into sort of overgeneralization and thinking that these binaries all align, right? But that they give you different lenses into what might be happening.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, the way you're exploring the idea and bringing in other things that just let me emphasize the goal of what we're doing here is to ensure that your students feel excited, jazzed, inspired to ask their own questions. And then let me go ask people I know who live in those zip codes. Let me find out from my public health department what else I need to know. Let me go find a promotora who works in that area that can help me understand this. It's to really look at areas of social change that are within their reach. So in the last few minutes, we have a hard stop at the bottom of the half hour, right, Eric? So, because I know you have another session starting. If we could go back to just the slide, this one, maybe we can come back to this one, but so what? Does this matter? Do our learners actually enjoy this kind of work? This is a newsletter that was published bilingually by Maria Jose's school. And Maria Jose, I'll just, if you could just in a minute, this is where it matters. This is where it counts, because this is what our learners are telling us about this kind of interaction.
Yeah, I'm going to be super fast, I promise. So I asked my students to write this short paragraph telling other women in the community about the classes, and they wrote it in Spanish and then they did it in English. So I'd like to read for you the Spanish version so I can represent my students' voices. La clase de inglés en MUA nos permite el aprendizaje de una forma interactiva y participativa. Por ejemplo, aprendemos acerca de nuestros derechos laborales. Nosotras practicamos cómo pedir ayuda para mejorar nuestra salud mental y física. Para nosotras y nuestras familias, interpretamos datos como gráficos de barras, gráficos circulares, nube de documentos de Word, estadísticas, evaluar fuentes de información y evitar fraudes y estafas relacionadas con COVID-19. And this is the part that I really like. And it's the last, if you can look at the last sentence in the English version. En nuestra clase no hay respuestas incorrectas, lo cual nos da confianza de no tener miedo cuando hablamos frente a otros. Por lo tanto, nos sentimos más confiadas y empoderadas. Thank you.
And I almost wish I could just end the Zoom there, because the students' voices should always be the voices that we listen to most profoundly. Thank you very much, Maria Jose, for sharing that. I'll not go through our last few resource slides, but I just dropped a link into the chat to a Padlet that has kind of a one-stop shop for just some references from today's presentation. We'll later post our slides there too. It'll also be on the NJAL website. We're still in the very much the fledgling stages of this work. So this is an unfinished slide because it says insert Padlet QR code. The Padlet is in the chat. So stay in touch. We hope that based on the enthusiasm in the chat, that you might want to learn more, that you might want to pilot some activities, learn about the curricular framework, and talking to your students about the data that are all around them. Thank you so much for coming today, and we'll stick around a little bit, but we also know you need a break before the next session.
Yeah, Maricel, it's saying somebody's saying the link doesn't work.
Okay, just gonna do as many technological goofs as I can in an hour.
The
So
Padlet, because I just clicked on it, seemed to.
Oh, all right. So other people are saying it's working. That's good. Okay. So just as a reminder to folks who maybe are coming to this session and not to the other ones, if you don't know that you can save chats in the Zoom call by going down to next to the file where there's a little 3 dots. If you click on that, then you can download the file for the chat. So there's the links, there's the emails, there's all those sorts of things. So it's a way to capture that information. But as Maricel said, I'll be uploading the PowerPoint with the live links probably within the next week or so, and then also an archived version of the presentation. And if you forget their emails, certainly just email us at NJAL and I can reconnect you to Maricel and her group. Right. So I want to thank everybody in the group, Maricel, for all the work that you all are doing. I think it's very interesting. I want to thank everybody who came and participated and were willing to do things about, more frivolous things like horoscope, but then also more serious things about, Long Beach and it's basically the data equivalent of compositional risk, right? So that when we ask students to write things and share them in class, they're taking a risk, right? And we need to make
nice connection. Yeah, thank you.
That risk. And so data storytelling is the same thing. You're doing an interpretive data risk. So I want to thank everybody for taking the data risks today during the presentation. So yes, they're in California, but they're worldwide. They're blowing up worldwide. So you can connect to them in a multiplicity of ways. All right. So if you need the PD certificate, I put it in the chat. It'll stay open for a few more minutes. And then we have one more session coming up today at 4. Renee Kubiatis from New Jersey Citizen Action, talking about advocacy and resources that students need. So if they're living in Long Branch and they don't have access to vaccines, right? So what can we do about it? Because that's the populations that we work with and care about. So, all right.
Thank you so much, everyone.
So enjoy all that fresh cilantro out there. And
I was going to send you a bunch tomorrow, Eric.
It just tastes like soap. I mean, that's like dichotomous, right? Like the people who like it love it, but the people who don't like it all think it tastes like soap, which is a really weird thing, right? It's not like some people dislike it and they're like, oh, it tastes like charcoal, or it tastes like, everybody's like me who doesn't like it. Like something in our taste buds are like, it tastes like soap. I don't know. It's a genetic thing, right? It's a genetic thing. No, it's true. The same thing is true about spinach, right? Like when we give kids a hard time about not eating spinach, it's because spinach literally tastes gross to kids. There's something about like their taste buds in their palate so that like spinach tastes gross. They're not being recalcitrant just for the sake of it, right? Like, although they're well within their rights to do that as kids, right? But they just, yeah, literally spinach doesn't taste good.
Yeah, I just put it on my mental bucket list to change your mind in this lifetime.
Roger, you can't. It's genetic. It's genetic. You can't change my mind about that. You can't. You know, it's funny. I was talking to my own students.
Damn, are you a Scorpio?
No, I'm a Capricorn.
A Capricorn.
I'm a Capricorn. So I was talking to my students about food. We often talk about food, and I'm like asking them for if their grandmas have like good mole recipes that they want to pass along, and they're like, no, my grandma's got a good mole recipe, but they're never going to pass it along to anybody else, right? That's going to go to the grave with her because that's her thing. So we were talking about food, and I came up with like a sample dialogue. I don't know, to exemplify some grammar point. I came up with a dialogue, and oh no, it was like sort of gradations of strength of like response. We're like, no thanks, no way, that kind of stuff. And so
Great ESL lesson.
yeah, so I used flan, and it was like, keep that flan away from me. and I was just saying, I hate flan. And so one of my students was like, I can't take ESL class with you anymore, teacher, because if you don't like flan, you're not a good person. So I have to leave.
There is a great ESL lesson here about what's the variable that creates the greatest spread of opinion. I think cilantro is one of them. Thank you so much, you guys. We're going to peel off. Hopefully see you on a couple more sessions. And thank you again. Flan is life.
Very
Yes.
much.